Welcome to our joint Torah Fund event. I'm Linda Boxer, President of the International Northeast Region of Women's League.
And I'm Barbara Finkel, President of Seaboard Region. We're delighted to be together to support Torah Fund. We bring greetings from Women's League International President Julia Loeb and Executive Director Rabbi Ellen Wolensfields. They are actually together now in Israel and unable to join us this evening.
We are pleased that you have joined us this evening. This event is just one of many available to you as a member of your sisterhood affiliate, which in turn gives you membership in your region and in Women's League. There are weekly newsletters from Women's League and frequent ones from your region. If you are not getting these newsletters, let Barbara or me know and we'll get you signed up.
We start all our meetings with a bit of study, so here's a quick summary of Yitro, next Shabbat's Parsha. In this Torah reading, Moses tells his father-in-law, Jethro or Yitro, about the miracle of the Exodus. Jethro proclaims that the Israelite God is greater than all other gods, and he makes a sacrifice.
To continue the summary, Jethro then advises Moses to delegate leadership roles in order not to tire himself out. The Israelites camp at the bottom of Mount Sinai. After 3 days, the mountain fills with smoke, and God delivers the 10 Commandments to the Israelites.
When we, as volunteers, share leadership, we strengthen our communities by both learning from and teaching each other while we work together for our common goals.
A bit of housekeeping before we get started with our speaker. Please keep yourself muted to make it easier for all of us to hear our speaker. And if you have not already done so, please make sure you are identified by your full name and add your city. Because we're from different regions, it'll be nice to see where everyone is from. The chat function will be disabled during the talk, but will open for Q&A at the end of our guest presentation.
Thank you. So with those reminders out of the way, I'd like to introduce Seaboard's Torah Fund Vice President, Ellen Weiss.
And I'd like to introduce INR's Torah Fund Vice President, Adele Weinstein.
Torah Fund is the philanthropy of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. For 83 years, Torah Fund has been supporting the students in institutes of higher Jewish learning. Today, Torah Fund provides scholarships and programs to students in 5 conservative Masorti institutes around the world. These include the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles, California, the Schechter Institutes of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem, Seminario Rabbinico Latino Americano in Buenos Aires, and the new Abraham J. Heschel Seminary for Rabbinic Training in Potsdam, Germany.
Every person has the opportunity to ensure conservative Masorti Judaism grows and flourishes for generations to come by supporting Torah Fund. The students today will become our teachers, rabbis, hazans, and lay leaders. Torah Fund is truly a grassroots effort. There are only 2 paid employees. The work of raising awareness and fundraising is done locally in each of Women's League affiliates in the US and Canada, with the guidance of Women's League leadership and 13 region vice presidents like Ellen and myself.
If you have already made a donation to Torah Fund, thank you very much. Please consider making your first or an additional donation to the General Am Yisrael Chai campaign, or to creating new spaces. This is a special project with the goal of raising $200,000 to be split equally between 2 projects. One project is to build a physical space, a Women's League study space in the new undergraduate residence hall at the Jewish Theological Seminary.
The other project is to create space to think differently, the development of a special course of training for students at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies entitled Women's League Institute on Gender Bias and Harassment. We are only about $12,000 from reaching the $200,000 goal. Every donation brings us closer to that goal.
Have you heard about the Torah Fund Legacy Society? If you're interested in estate giving, let Adele or me know, and we can tell you all about the steps to make an afterlife gift. It's easier than you think.
All gifts, large and small, have an impact. Thank you, merci, toda rabah, for all that you do to support Torah Fund.
We hope you have all seen Joe Blumberg's biography in the flyer, so there is no need to read it to you again. We appreciate that Joe has taken time from his studies to join us this evening.
Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Adele. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Terrific. Okay, great. It's so good to see you all. I want to start by just sharing my gratitude for your fundraising work on behalf of all of my classmates. I actually did not grow up in the conservative movement. I grew up in the reform movement in Boston. And I didn't know what Women's League was or what Torah Fund was until a couple of years ago when I started at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And a group of Women's League leaders came to have lunch with us as first-year rabbinical students. And they started explaining that there are these chapters of leaders all over the country and Canada and the world who are thinking about our education years and decades before we even get to JTS. And it blew my mind that there's just this incredible network of people who are that devoted to my learning, folks who don't even know who I am and who are willing to give of their time and their money and their souls to make sure that rabbinic education in our movement is strong. So I was really floored to learn that you all exist a couple years ago, and I'm really glad to meet you and be with you for a few moments tonight. I'll talk a little bit more about JTS towards the end of my remarks tonight. But one of the things I'll say just in connection with Torah Fund is what I love the most about JTS is the diversity of my classmates. And that's economic diversity and political diversity and religious diversity, but particularly economic diversity. There's a lot of folks at JTS who would not be able to pay for the very expensive experience of becoming a rabbi if it were not for groups like yours. So really, we would not be here without you. I would not be here without you. So I just want to start with a proper thank you. I also wanted to share just kind of as a framing for how I'm thinking about my work and the work that we all have to do in the world as Jews right now, with a story about a beloved former JTS professor. Maybe some of you have heard this story. There's a story about Dr. Avraham Holtz, who was a professor in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, maybe later even. He was a really beloved professor, and back in the 1950s, he had moved to Israel for a couple of years, and that was the beginning of the state, and everyday items were pretty hard to come by, and he ordered a telephone for his apartment. And he waited a week, and he waited a couple weeks and a couple months, and the telephone never arrived. So he went down to the telephone store to ask what was going on. And the guy at the telephone store said, "We have no more telephones. We're all out." And Dr. Holtz said, "There's no hope. There's no hope that I could get a telephone soon. Ein tikva." And the man at the telephone store said, "Asur liyehudi lomar ein tikva. Tikva yesh efsharut ein." Which means in English, it's forbidden for a Jew to say there is no hope. There's no possibility that you're getting your telephone anytime soon, but there's always hope. And that's a paradox that I think sits at the core of what it means to be a Jew in the world. You know, we persist despite all evidence to the contrary that we would not be here. I think it's a paradox that sits particularly at the core of what it means to be a Jew today, that we wake up and there's news that seems to get worse and worse, particularly from Israel. And then there are these spurts of possibility. and then it goes back into hopelessness, and we go back and forth from hopelessness to hope. And I think that's the Jewish story. And I think what our tradition gives us is the strength to say, yes, we are experiencing a period of real darkness right now, and we're not going to ignore that. And at the same time, the whole point of being a Jew is to hold on to a hope that doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's a paradox that is very real and that's very alive for me. So I'm hoping that story can give us a little bit of comfort and framing tonight, especially as we wait for better news coming out of Israel. So I'll give you a brief bio, not the things that are in my official biography, but I'm a third-year rabbinical student at JTS. I come from Lexington, Massachusetts, and I grew up in the Reform movement. My grandfather is actually a Reformed congregational rabbi. And I loved Judaism growing up, but I did not want to be a rabbi because it was the family business. And I thought it was really great that my grandfather was the rabbi and I wanted to be a classical trumpet player. My parents were very supportive and I was half decent. And I really started making my career in the classical music world. And Judaism was always in the background for me. And especially in college, I was leading services weekly, but it was really a private love. It wasn't a professional interest. And I was playing classical trumpet at summer festivals and starting to prepare for auditioning for orchestra seats after I graduated from college. And then the summer between my junior and senior year of college, I was playing at a music festival and had an injury to my lips. I pinched a nerve in my lips in the middle of a concert. And it was this moment of really radical transition. I had never considered doing anything else professionally in my admittedly young life. And suddenly I was faced with the potential, and it turned out to be true, that I would never be able to play again. And it kicked off a year of really radical thought and self-discovery. Who am I if I'm not a professional musician? If any of you have ever gone through major life transitions, if you thought this was where your path was headed and then you're suddenly on a new path, that's what I was experiencing. And I started kind of having conversations, particularly with the rabbis at my Hillel. I went to Yale for undergrad, and so I was hanging out with the rabbis in those hours that I wasn't performing or rehearsing, and having conversations about what did I really care about? Who did I want to be in the world? How did I want to spend my time? And some of the things that I identified were that I wanted to spend my time working on projects that really meant something and that could only be done well with a group of people working on them. That's what I loved about the orchestra life. You're sitting there with 100 other musicians and nobody really wants to hear you play by yourself, but they really want to hear you come together and play a Beethoven symphony. And there was something that I noticed about the Jewish world where there's something amazing when we're individually living our Jewish lives, doing Jewish ritual, learning about Jewish texts on our own. And then the real magic happens when we come together. And I sense that magic in my own Hillel experience. And I wanted to chase that. I'm sure you know what that feels like. Even in this room tonight, there's a magic of coming together to do something bigger than yourself. So that was important to me. I wanted to do something where I could have conversations about the meaning of life and the meaning of death and really get down to the heart of it and not sugarcoat life. And so yeah, I had a lot of these conversations with rabbis and mentors in my life who all said, the things that you're interested in really add up to being a rabbi. Maybe you should think about it. And at that point, a story floated back from the back of my mind to the front of my mind that really put me over the edge. And so this is the story that I tell about why I became a rabbi or a rabbinical student. I was 11 years old. It was Friday afternoon, and I was going through Trader Joe's, checking out with my grandparents. And it was we were in Newton, Massachusetts. There's a lot of Jews in Newton, Massachusetts. So Trader Joe's line was long on Friday afternoon. Everyone was preparing for Shabbat. We get to the front of the line finally, and the cashier was one of my grandfather's congregants. And this woman had just lost her mother. And I remember in the middle of this busy Trader Joe's, the line was stretching longer and longer behind us. And both of my grandparents, who both knew her well, just asked how she was in a deep way, and they really wanted to know. And we stayed for about 5 minutes as that line snaked longer and longer. And I remember thinking, if I could do that with my life, if that's the kind of conversation that I could have professionally, nothing could be better. And then I kind of put it to the side and pursued music. And then as I was going through this year of what am I going to do, stories like that came back to the forefront. So to make a long story short, I started thinking maybe rabbinical school would be a good option. And I moved to Israel for a while, and I taught at Brown for a while for the Jewish community, really making sure that this is something that I wanted to do. And I was increasingly convinced, yes, this is something that I want to do. So I was looking for rabbinical schools at that point. And this is where JTS comes in. I was looking at basically all of the liberal rabbinical schools on the Northeast. So Hebrew College in Boston, JTS in New York, and Hebrew Union College, which is the Reform Seminary in New York. And I liked all of them for different reasons. And then I got down to the question of where I was going to go. And I was thinking about the rabbis, both in my own personal life and out in the Jewish world, who inspired me the most, who I wanted to be like. And most of them had gone to JTS. Maybe some of them are your rabbis. I was thinking about rabbis like Michelle Dardashi, who was my mentor at Brown, and rabbis like Sharon Brous, who is a superstar in Los Angeles, running a community that she founded, INR, and Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who founded an organization called Sfara, which is focused on welcoming LGBTQ people into the project of Torah learning. And all of these people had gone to JTS. And what I admired about them, and what I now admire about my colleagues primarily, is their ability to sit and learn in a traditional way, go all the way down to the root of Jewish sources and really understand our tradition, develop the language, develop the expertise, and then take that tradition and go out and make radical change in the world. That's what I'm interested in doing. But I wanted to be able to do that from a place of really deep knowledge, so that when I was innovating, I knew that I was innovating on something that was sustainable and that would last into future generations, because it was based on true Torah, whatever that means. So I found myself at JTS, and I'm now in my third year. The past few years have been really incredible, very hard. The first 2 years of rabbinical school are brutal academically, but I made it through. I'm in my third year now. Some of the things that I love about JTS the most is the scholarship of our professors. If any of you have learned with our professors, it's one of the only institutions that I would say equally values academic scholarship and spiritual intensity and rigor and questioning within the Jewish world. And so many of my mentors have shown me how to do that. Another thing that's been amazing has been the professional experiences that I've had at JTS. And now, if I can, I'll share my screen and show you some photos of the things that I've done. Let's see if this is going to work. Okay. Can you see the photo of me with a Torah and only that and not anything else? Okay, that's good. So this is a photo of me and some congregants at a small community in Bath, Maine. It's mid-coast Maine, right on the water. It's a community that's part of the Center for Small Town Jewish Life, which is based in Maine and was developed by a JTS rabbi, by Rachel Isaacs. And her goal was to create a consortium of tiny synagogues in rural places, and also create a rabbinic training consortium for rabbis who might one day be interested in serving those small communities. And at the time, and still, I am potentially interested in being in that kind of role. So I was placed with a congregational rabbi who has a community of about 100 families. It's very small. And I would go up every once in a while and teach, take the kids on hikes, really do place-based Judaism. That's the term that we use for Judaism that's really rooted in the area. So we did a lot of hikes out on the river in Maine where we went out to the ocean a lot. This is some members of the community. This was the first real rabbinic experience that I had. And I was floored. This community brought me in as a total stranger and said, yeah, we trust you to give some Divrei Torah here and teach some classes. And they were kind of the first community to trust me in that way and send me on my way of becoming a congregational rabbi. Let's see if I can. This is a photograph of me at BlackRock headquarters in downtown New York. They had a shareholder meeting a couple years ago, and we were protesting and requesting that BlackRock consider the future of our climate in their shareholder meeting. This was part of work that I did with Dayenu, which is a Jewish call to climate action. Maybe some of you have worked with Dayenu in the past. One of my other very many professional experiences in rabbinical school so far was organizing with Dayenu. So it was organizing congregations all over the country to think really deeply, particularly in our movement, about their investments as a congregation, thinking about how to make greener investments with the endowments that those congregations had. And then every once in a while, we would gather our people and make a big stink like we made at BlackRock. And this was kind of the first professional opportunity that I had to, you know, shout my Jewish values out on a bullhorn like this to anybody who would listen and say, the things that we're studying at 3080 Broadway and JTS matter a lot. And it's not enough to talk about our Jewish values. You really have to go out and, as Rabbi Heschel said, pray with your feet. I don't do enough of that, but this was one of the first really rabbinic professional experiences and opportunities that I had to lead in that way. All opportunities that I would not have had if I wasn't a student at JTS, truthfully. And that brings me to my current job. I'm a rabbinic fellow at B'nai Jeshurun, which is a non-denominational synagogue on the Upper West Side. Many of our conservative movement friends belong there. It's not technically part of the movement, but the dean of JTS attends, and Rabbi Matzalon, who's in the middle, is a JTS alum. And this is where I spend a lot of my time now. So I'm teaching classes and working with students. I'm working with conversion students, and also on the rabbinic rotation for officiating life cycle events, weddings and births and funerals and shivas. And so this kind of marks my transition from, I'm still a student for several more years, but a little bit of the transition from beginner of rabbinical school to actually having some pretty significant rabbinic responsibilities. And this is another congregation that has entrusted me and many generations of rabbinic student fellows before me to be their proto-rabbi. They take my rabbinic training very seriously. They're invested in our learning as students. There's another JTS student there with me. And it's just been a ton of fun. This has been my work this year. It'll be my work next year. And this is where I'm at now in my journey. I have one text that I'd love to teach, but I want to make sure that we're on time. So Adele, do we have maybe 4 minutes? Okay. So there's this piece of Torah that has been rattling around in my head that I wanted to share with you all as kind of an expression of where I'm thinking about my current rabbinic work. And again, part of the work that I think our community writ large as a Jewish people has to do. You'll have to stay with me for a minute because it starts very esoteric. This is from the Talmud on page 6b of Tractate Moed Katan. And the rabbis are arguing in the only the way the rabbis could argue about how to take care of an ant infestation in your backyard. So the setting for this text, and I promise it becomes meaningful in a few minutes. The setting for this text is if you have to destroy ants on Chol HaMoed during a festival, maybe there's a bunch of ants in your backyard under your sukkah and you don't want them to be there. How do you do that? So the sages taught the following baraita. I'm now reading from the screen. How does one destroy ant holes? Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, one brings soil from this ant hole and places it in that ant hole. And since the ants from the two nests are not familiar with each other, they strangle each other. So this is the opening. I promise it gets better. Stay with me. This is the opening of the text. The idea is if you want to get rid of two groups of ants that don't know each other, take some ants from this hole and put them over there, and they won't recognize each other, and so they'll destroy each other. Now I'm back reading on the text. Rav Yemar ben Bar Shalamia said in the name of his teacher Abaye, this advice only works in certain circumstances. When the ant holes are located on two opposite sides of a river, when there's no bridge connecting the two sides, when there is not even a plank bridge over the water, and when there is not even a rope stretched taut across the river. If there is any connection whatsoever between the two sides of the river, the ants from the two nests are likely to recognize each other and not fight. So Rav Yemar Bar Shalamia says, really, this only applies if the ants have never seen each other before. If there's even so much as a tiny little pathway where one ant from this ant hole might have at one point met another ant from that ant hole, then the communities of ants are not going to kill each other. And maybe you can see where I'm going with this. I think the work that rabbis have to do right now as our community internally and also between ourselves and other peoples of the world become more and more isolated and more closed off and concerned about ourselves. I think it's the work of rabbis and the work of all Jews to say, no, we're actually going to build those bridges so that the two groups don't kill each other. And hopefully that's metaphorical killing of each other, but it has real world implications. Our goal is to build bridges between different kinds of Jews, between Jews and non-Jews, between Israel and the world, to bring about more peace and understanding. And I think that's, as much as anything else that I've mentioned tonight, really a core rabbinic value that I have that comes straight out of our tradition that I hope we all share. So I'll pause there, and I think maybe we're going to transition into questions if anybody has questions. Questions can be about what's going on at JTS, what's going on in the conservative movement. Me?
I have a question.
Sure.
It can be about anything, right?
Anything. Shoot.
Okay, brace yourself. So, as a bassoonist, I want to know what happened to your lip.
Well, maybe we'll have a longer conversation off screen, but the short story is I was playing too much and pinched a nerve in my embouchure.
Okay, that answers that. I understand that. I understand that. Well, you know, you come, I enjoyed that little thing you just did and your journey. And I think that you will bring even more because of your background in classical music. You have a tendency to be, that's how I'm seeing it, okay? Because you have, music alone brings you through all sorts of experiences. And I think once you really play, that you feel it even more. So I'm looking forward to seeing you doing great, great things and to hear about some of your experiences out there in the communities. I'm looking forward to that. And when you come to Maryland, look us up.
Thanks, Geraldine. I'll see you in Maryland.
Okay.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Joyce?
Yes, could you tell us about the cantorial program at JTS, if anything is left of it, and how it's being handled, please?
Yeah. If anything is left of it, it's a weighty framing. It has become smaller over the years, that's for sure. The cantorial program is great. There's I couldn't tell you exactly how many students there are. My guess is around 20, maybe 25. It's small. The faculty's terrific. They're singing their hearts out. And we get to study with them. I think that's one of the unique things about the JTS program. And Joyce, it sounds like you might know something about that program, is cantors that come out of JTS really know their stuff textually also. And so we get to learn with them. I'm actually singing in a cantorial student's Nusach presentation next week, and they take classes with us. There's not quite as much engagement as I would like there to be, but there is some. I don't know so
Well,
much.
our two cantors graduated from JTS.
Uh-huh.
I'm with Pardes Israel congregation.
Yeah.
So you know Arian Brown. And she is, of course, top drawer. And I feel every week that I listen to her that I'm getting a free ticket by virtue of being a member of Pardes to the highest level of music that Judaism has to offer.
That's beautiful. Adele, and then maybe Lorna.
Joe, where do you see yourself in 15 years?
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to finish rabbinical school. My head screwed on straight. 15, I mean, I really want to be a congregational rabbi. I think that's my hope. Location, I don't know. A piece that I skipped over, I interned for a year at a very large conservative synagogue in Dallas, Texas. I don't know if any of our folks are from Texas. I did not want to intern there. Our dean called me into her office one day and said, this congregation asked for an intern. We think you'd be a good fit. Can you talk to them? And my first answer was no, because I'm a Bostonian, a New Yorker, maybe, but I'm not a Texan. And then I went because they encouraged me into it, and I loved it. So I could see myself potentially ending up somewhere else, but probably a congregational rabbi in the Northeast.
Thank you. I think you'll be great wherever you go.
Thanks, Adele. And I'm going to rely on you to cut us off. So let us know when it's time. Lorna and then Joan.
Okay, hi. Your talk was very interesting. You mentioned that you still have several more years of study to become a full-fledged rabbi. So I was just wondering exactly how many years do you have to, is your rabbinical course?
Yeah, it's 5 years. The first 2 years are typically very Beit Midrash intensive. So that's learning all of your biblical Hebrew, your grammar, how to read a page of Talmud, very text heavy. The third year is usually spent in Israel, and we did not spend our third year in Israel because of the war, but my class is going over the summer. And then the fourth and fifth years, you typically turn more towards a lot of internships, a lot of time spent out in the community. So I'm halfway through.
Do you have a choice in where you go to when you're doing that internship?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's no dearth of conservative synagogues in New York and New Jersey. So there's lots of communities who need and want a rabbinic intern. Most of our rabbinical students have 1 year of a congregational internship during their fourth year. That's the formal congregational internship year. I started at B'nai Jeshurun a little bit early and might stay a little bit later because I have a particular interest in congregational work, but that's kind of the trajectory and the focus.
Thank you. Thanks.
Joan and then Marilyn.
So you mentioned why you chose JTS as far as for schooling. I wondered, growing up Reform, was there any like pull as far as Reform versus conservative, or was it just simply the ideals of JTS and the program, or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I still see myself as sort of in between the Reform movement and the conservative movement. And I know the aesthetics of those two movements are different in Canada, but the way I grew up, I was very drawn to the music of the Reform movement and the participation. I didn't see so many conservative synagogues when I was growing up that focused on congregant participation. And then I slowly found a few more that did. And I thought, there is something to more traditional ritual. I wanted to have the language to daven in Hebrew. I wanted to be able to make decisions halachically. And that was a pretty important gap between the Reform movement and the conservative movement. I really liked HUC when I went to visit to think about being a student there. But I wanted to be surrounded by people who were thinking through their Jewish lives from a halachic perspective. I could maybe one day see myself, working in a Reform synagogue, but at this point, I feel pretty at home in the conservative movement.
And my question comes from a particular perspective because I actually work in a Reform synagogue. So
yeah.
I was curious as to that because I personally never had any idea of the differences until I started working there. And it was,
wow.
It was a shocker to me. So
yeah, they can be really different.
Yeah, it can.
Marilyn, did you have a question?
So are you aware of other areas that, other than being a congregational rabbi, that your fellow students might pursue, other things that might pursue?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say, and if any of you have ever served on a rabbinic search committee in recent years, you might be familiar with the fact that a lot of people graduating from JTS are interested in doing things other than congregational rabbinate. A lot of folks are interested in teaching, either at day schools for kids or at a Hillel on a college campus. A lot of folks go into chaplaincy, either in a hospital or hospice or in the military, or actually prison chaplaincy is increasingly of interest for a lot of my friends. There's also a lot of kind of social justice oriented Jewish organizing work that's done largely by rabbis. I think that's a little bit more prevalent in New York and Boston than other parts of at least the United States. Some people are interested in getting PhDs from Columbia down the street and going and being professors of Judaism of different sorts. I would say half of my cohort wants to be congregational rabbis, and give or take 50, 60, 70% in other cohorts. Barbara?
Yeah, I actually was planning to ask you a different question, but now I want to follow up on that. Do you know, I took it from the way you started that this is like a new, maybe this is a change from 20 or 30 or more years ago and I'm wondering why. Is it just the demands of being a congregational rabbi are too great? And I'm also wondering specifically in terms of women, do you think, is there a divide in, in male and female, and what they want to pursue?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. So I think to answer the first part of your question, why fewer people are going to rabbinical school, and it's many fewer. I mean, in the early 2000s, there might have been 20 or 30 people in a rabbinical school class, and now my class has 4. The class below is bigger. It has 8 or 9. My class is the smallest by far ever. It's kind of a fluke, I think, having to do with COVID. But it is down. Even most classes now have 9 or 10 students. It's hard to put a finger on it. I think part of it is rabbinical school has always been and is now very expensive. Even with your generosity, it is still incredibly expensive to move to New York for 5 years and not work full time. And so I think that's an issue. I think a lot of rabbinical students are either coming later in life or are coming right out of college. Many fewer are married than I think they used to be. And so I think just the financial reality of rabbinical students is more challenging and also more diverse than it used to be. Being a congregational rabbi is hard. And I think there's an interest, especially for people who have an interest in doing communal work, unless they are really interested in the Jewish spirituality piece of it. There's so many other opportunities to do social justice oriented organizing work in our world, which is an amazing thing, but I think that does draw people away. And there's more rabbinical schools. I mean, JTS, I would say, used to have a corner on the market of traditionally minded egalitarian people who want to go to rabbinical school. And now Hebrew College in Boston is an incredible institution. They are non-denominational. Maharat is in Riverdale, New York. That's a rabbinical school for Orthodox women. Yeshivat Chovevei Torah is a new rabbinical school, also in Riverdale, for very liberal Orthodox men. And so where it used to be the case where you just go to JTS if you're not Reform and not Orthodox, now there's just a lot more at play. I think those are probably the main issues. Linda?
You mentioned Rabbi, I just drew a blank, the Center for Small Towns, Rachel Isaacs. She was our scholar in residence last year. And our rabbi roomed with her when they were in rabbinic school, because we joke all the time, Buffalo is the center of the universe. So, but you talked about going on hikes when you were up in Maine and teaching Judaism when hiking. You talked about your grandfather basically paying a shiva call in the middle of Trader Joe's. Where do you teach most? How do you teach on a walk? How do you pay a shiva call in Trader Joe's?
Oh, wow, Linda, that's such an awesome question. I will answer. I just realized I forgot to answer part 2 of Barbara's question, which was about women and men in rabbinical school. There are 4 students in my class. 3 out of the 4 of us are women. There's a lot of female rabbinical students at JTS these days. I don't know the statistics, but I'm guessing it's at least 50%, potentially more. I wouldn't say that I see a clear distinction between the kinds of rabbinic careers that my male and female colleagues want to pursue. Linda, that's such a great question. And it kind of gets to the core of the modern pastoral education that JTS teaches. We all take a class called Clinical Pastoral Education, which is a summer-long course, usually at a hospital. I was working at a public hospital in Harlem. And the job as these chaplain interns is to be able to walk into anybody's hospital room at a public hospital where you know nobody, introduce yourself, and within a couple seconds, convey a sense of serious listening, a real interest in hearing where they are, and kind of developing the emotional intelligence tools that you need to meet anybody where they are at. I think that's the hardest thing that you learn in rabbinical school. It's something I am still working on. I think it's by far the most important thing that JTS teaches its students. And, you know, I spent the entire summer walking into hospital rooms of people who I'd never met, would never see again. I met one Jewish person the entire summer. I probably met 1,000 patients and there was one Jewish patient. So you really get to, in the lingo of going to the gym, you get a lot of reps, a lot of repetitions of meeting people where they're at, complete strangers, and diving in with them. I think one of the things that I'm still really working on is conveying an interest in vulnerability. It's should come naturally. It does come naturally for me internally, but really figuring out how do you get across to someone that you really want to listen to their story, because it's pretty countercultural these days. Our world moves very quickly. Very few people have interest, real deep interest in sitting down for as long as the other person needs to tell their story. So there's a lot of emotional dynamics that they are teaching us well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bobby.
Bobby?
Is there a requirement to get your degree to do a semester abroad in Israel?
Yeah. So there's still a requirement that rabbinical students spend a whole year in Israel. Not everybody does. As I said earlier, people's lives are different. A lot of rabbinical students have children. A lot of rabbinical students, you know, have parents that they're taking care of. And so it can be hard for everybody to just drop out of life and move to Jerusalem for a year. But that is still the expectation. And if it hadn't been for the war, I would have been there this year.
How long will you be there this summer? You said you were going this summer.
Unfortunately, only 2 months. But I'm looking forward to it. If there's no more questions, there's just one more thing that I wanted to mention, which is, it kind of has to do with what I was teaching. It's the thing that I was most surprised by when I got to JTS was the intellectual and spiritual diversity. And that's not just, you know, some people came from Reform backgrounds and some people came from Orthodox backgrounds. Even within my cohort, there are really different thoughts about Israel, the future of Zionism, interfaith marriage, these hot button issues that particularly in our communities, I think are often seen as the problem that needs to be solved. Nobody agrees, and what are we going to do about interfaith marriage? And it's a huge issue. And one of the things that I realized at JTS is you can very easily reframe the diversity of thought as a bonus. I think our movement is a bigger tent than any other movement in this country, in both countries, potentially. And I think we need to start seeing our fellow Jews approach to those issues that are most challenging and most hot button as not necessarily a threat, but as an opportunity. And as a way to show to the world, we are a community that still holds a diversity of opinions, even when that is no longer socially vogue or relevant. And I found that at JTS, and I hope that our movement continues to carry the torch for that. So thank you all so much for spending some time with me and listening to my story.
Thank you.
So much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Adele and Ellen, you're going to wrap up?
Joe, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And we all join you in wishing you a very successful career. And as I said before, I think you're going to do well whatever shul or whatever path you take.
And I would say ditto, and whoever has the pleasure to be in your company, you're going to be lucky people. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, everybody, so much. I am
Thank
going to
you.
put
Thank you. Thank
Study
you.
hard.
my email is going in the chat if anybody wants to follow up on things that I spoke about.
This is great. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Joe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good luck to
you.
you.
Thank you.
All the
Bye.
best. All the best.
All right, thank you. Thank you to Ellen and Adele for bringing this wonderful program to us. And of course, to Joe Blumberg for joining us this evening. Barbara, you there?
Yeah, I'm about to talk. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good. Thank you. So just looking forward in terms of Seaboard region, I just want to make sure everyone knows about our sustainability retreat that's taking place on May 4th at Pearlstone Center in Reisterstown, Maryland. I hope you, many of you can join us.
And INR's next event is March 19th on Zoom, when we welcome Rivka Campbell, a Jew of Jamaican descent, who was born and raised in Toronto. And planning is underway for our May 4th virtual conference. Watch for more information and registration links for those events.
And I want to thank Toby Mazer for providing all of our tech support, and Joan Lowenstein for handling registration, and to all of you for joining us this evening.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.